Hello, viewers. I welcome you to Eugene Classic Podcast, where we invite you to think beyond the surface and also ask questions that aren't asked. Today, we have on our show Prof. Vredenburg Karel, who is an industry leader and also in the academia, has done a lot of work and he keeps doing it. And without much introduction, I would just like to let you know that he's a father of four too. Prof, welcome to Eugene Classic Podcast.
Thank you so much, Eugene. I've been so impressed by you. We'd only met recently, but I am delighted to be on your show.
Thanks so much. And there's one thing that we really appreciate on Eugene Classic Podcast is the gift of presence that our guest gives to us, because we do believe that in this digital era where there is evolution ongoing, where people are being evolving without even their awareness, we actually do believe that having this kind of personal and deep conversation and leaving nuggets behind for the next posterity. So, Prof, before we even start, I would like to ask you, what are your three favorite quotes?
Three favorite quotes. I think that there are many, many, many. And in fact, if you go onto my website, you'll see some. But one of my favorite ones is, do not go where the path may lead. Go instead and create a path yourself. And that really, I think, is something that has inspired me my whole career. I've never taken the common path that people typically go, as we might get into. I mean, I was going to be going into academia and clinical psychology, and I took a different path over into technology and into design and research, which was not a common path at the time. And even my transformation in my role in industry, that was also not a common one as well. Like, I needed to create a job title for director of design, for example, that didn't exist at IBM where I was working. I had to create it. Now there's many, many people afterwards that have had that role as well. So I think that's one of the key concepts that I would share. I think other ones, you can actually go to my website, karelvredenburg.com, and I've got a lot of material there as well.
All right. Thank you very much, Prof. Prof, with your current project where you were founder for the Habit for a Better World, I want to know what actually inspired the idea.
Great question, Eugene. And it really was like my entire life, I've always tried to give back to make the world a better place. Even when I was working a day job, I always did additional things after on my own time. That's also what inspired my own podcast as well. And I'm impressed by yours, by the way. But same thing there too. I just wanted to be able to give back, and I didn't do it to make money or whatever. But I also thought that, and the actual origin story is that during the COVID pandemic, I decided that I wanted to have designers and researchers contribute their skills to do whatever we could to make the pandemic less dangerous and more successful in really keeping people safe and the like. And so I created a thing with the World Design Organization and Design for America called the COVID Design Challenge. And we had some close to 300 designers and researchers globally that all worked on how could we make things better during the pandemic. And so we worked on everything from ad campaigns that, social media campaigns that would encourage safe behaviors. We also had some work where we looked at the advice and guidance given to hospital workers, doctors and nurses when they were going into the ICU. How could they put the PPE on properly? And that was a PDF of 17 pages that we converted into something that was much more easy to follow. Even in India, there was a lot of spousal abuse going on. And so the team there created a symbol that typically women could draw on the outside of their wherever they live that would indicate that there's a problem there. So anyway, really successful project. And after that project finished, there was a gentleman from Vancouver who worked for a company called Tea Leaves. That was a highly sustainable tea company. And he reached out to me and he said, Karel, I'd like to do something together with you. I do things with the world, the UN, various initiatives there. And I said, okay, let's have a conversation about what we might do together. And we had Zoom calls probably once a month for 3 or 4 months. And at one point I said, you know what, this isn't going anywhere. We're not really coming up with anything that we should be doing together. So I said, why don't I travel to Vancouver? My daughter now lives in Vancouver anyway. And I thought, okay, maybe we should just get together in person like we are now.
Yeah.
And one other person on the call that was on his team said, but Karel, I live in Toronto. Why don't we get together? That woman's name was Carly Williams. She's a filmmaker. And she and I got together shortly after that meeting. We spent the rest of the day together after having a lunch together. And we both had the same objective to say, what if we used design, research, and filmmaking, storytelling skills to improve and address a lot of the challenges that we have in the world? So everything from climate change, environmental issues, to health, human health, looking at animal and human suffering, looking at biodiversity loss, even looking at AI and the negative aspects of AI and how we could address those. And so we decided to launch a project, and I posted on LinkedIn basically that, hey, I did these other projects before. We now want to do this thing, Carly and me together. Got 450 people applying to be doing this volunteer work from all around the world. We said, that is amazing. So we ended up with 300, and we've been going for a little bit more than a year now. And we did a lot of research. We basically started with everybody that was in the overall volunteer group, chose what topics were particular interests of theirs, whether it was climate change or health, etc. And then we had them all read basically all of the scientific literature available for that. And we wanted to focus specifically on how could individuals make change? Because we often say, when it's like environmentalism, for example, well, companies need to do that, governments need to do that. Well, no, when you actually look at the scientific research literature, you find that the number one thing that we can do is make changes to our habits ourselves in terms of climate change, certainly in terms of health, biodiversity loss as well. And a lot of the dealing with AI also is things that we could do ourselves. So we first did that. Then each of the teams did research with a number of people. We did a whole lot of studies. We consolidated all the results. We then focused on what we could do given what we've learned, like why people weren't adopting these desired habits, for example, to address all these challenges. And we basically came up with storyboards of how we could change people's minds about doing this and how we could go about putting together an overall system to address all of that. And we started by wanting to do a documentary, and Carly's a filmmaker. And the research that we did really indicated that a documentary wasn't the most important thing to do. It was still important to do, but it wasn't the most important. What we really needed to do was really reach people where they are. So we wanted to reach them on social media, even in-person events as well. And then a lot of organizations try to inspire people to make changes, but then don't follow through to provide support. So we also now are building a website. We're building an AI RAG implementation, AI assistant, and then also a digital support online system, and then also doing Zoom calls so people can get together and talk about this stuff as well. And then we're documenting all of this with the documentary that we're building as well. So that's kind of the whole quick summary of the entire project.
Prof, thank you very much for the whole elaboration on the idea and how it started. Prof, I would like to follow up with a quick question. You being a professor, with your expertise in psychology, there is a lot of definition of what habit is. But I would like to know your personal definition for it. And I know that you also believe that whatever that you do, you should have an end in the mind before you start.
Yes.
So after the definition of habit, you elaborate on why we should have the end always in mind before we even start the project.
So habits are really behaviors that we repeat naturally, that we are so experienced doing, and it takes, depending on what habit we're talking about or what behavior we're talking about, it typically takes anywhere between 4 to 6 weeks to establish a habit from behavior that you do repeatedly and are getting appropriate reinforcement for doing. So it ends up being habitual. So it ends up being something you do on a regular basis. And I think that, when you talk about starting with the end in mind, it's actually one of my favorite books is Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of his 7 habits was, in fact, to start with the end in mind. And I think that everything that we do needs to be done that way. You have to imagine what's the end state that you want to go for. Like a lot of people just say, oh, let's just start doing something. So no, think about where you want to end up with this. And that's what's guided our work on the Habits for a Better World project all the way along, thinking about, okay, you know what? Do we want to do this? That's cool. Do we want to do? No, our objective is to have people change their behavior in an habitual way, and the changes in behavior that we will inspire and support will then also lead to, when we scale it with a lot of people, will affect changes basically to climate, also their own personal health, reduction in animal and human suffering, etc. So the whole idea is to inspire people to make these changes. That's our objective. That's our end goal. But then we're also using, Eugene, it's kind of important to cover this too, that a lot of people, when you talk about things like climate change, people will talk about, you have to be, altruistic. You've got to do things for the environment, not for yourself, for the environment. And a lot of the work that people see tries to guilt them into, oh, don't do this because, you need to be thinking about the environment. And our approach is that we want to realize that a lot of people are selfish. They're more likely to make a change if it directly impacts themselves first, even if it then has an impact on other things like the environment, maybe animals and the like as well. But to start basically with trying to inspire them to do something and even get them inspired because it will make a change, like the fact that they're going to possibly live 11 years longer if they adopted a plant-based diet, for example, or that they're going to be stronger and faster and the like. And so it's a personal, personal focus that we're trying to create and then appeal to their desire to improve themselves. And that in turn, once they start doing that behavior, it'll also end up helping many, many other things. But we don't want to start with the contributing to other things, not caring about yourselves, because it's not as effective. We're also leaning in heavily to not using experts. Everything we're doing is research-based and science-based, but we don't want to lead with, a a person with a lab coat and a stethoscope saying this is what you should do, because there's been a death of expertise, for good or bad. There's a really good book actually called The Death of Expertise. And especially during the pandemic, that happened significantly as well. All of a sudden, just saying you're an expert and here's what we think doesn't have the same, power anymore as it used to. And so it's more likely going to be the case if we show somebody telling an authentic personal story of saying, I made these changes and this is the benefit that I got from it. That's way more influential to most people on, for example, social media than, like I say, having a lab coat and a stethoscope, talking about it as well.
So, Prof, with what you just said, that depth of expertise, why do you think that we have gotten to this stage?
Well, I think that there has been a plethora of expert opinion that appeared not to agree with one another. So it's sort of like the usual thing, this expert said this, and then other people, some other expert says the opposite, and then people throw their hands up. When in actual fact, some of the time, if you're really knowledgeable about science and medicine, you realize that, this other study that just came out, invalidated something we knew in the past. And intelligent people will then say, I want to look at the year this study was published to be able to make a change. But a lot of people that are not into really understanding it to that degree will just say all the experts disagree. So I'm just going to do, what my friend, does as well. So I think it's a number of things like that. And I think it's also the case that a lot of the time, just simply saying what an expert's opinion is shouldn't be enough. And what we're trying to do is say, no, but, we're going to base our stuff on real science, but we want to now really do what we can to make it something that's palatable and understandable and inspiring for you to do, as opposed to just an expert saying, thou shalt do whatever.
Yeah. Prof, in your flowing, you said that there should, you are trying to get people on that level of personal focus.
Mm-hmm.
And it came to my thoughts that, okay, let me ask Prof, as an academia and also being an industry player as a design executive with IBM, a multinational company that has its branches in almost 156 countries. You have a lot of experience under your belt through observation, reading, a lot of things, mentoring as a father, a lot. Do you think that medications are good in treating problems like ADHD?
Great question. And we could take this any number of directions. I think that there are a lot of medications that are very important to treat a number of different conditions. But I think, like I said about the experts, a lot of the time, I think we're pushing things just because, a drug company wants to make money and they try to convince the physician that this is the thing that you need to use. I think that ADHD likely is way over prescribed in terms of medications. I think that certain things become popular, this is now a particular disorder. But I think that some of the time it's also the case that I did work during my PhD program in depression and depression research. And there's really this sense that if you are just mildly depressed, you can get yourself out of that with the talk therapies, with cognitive behavior therapy, that sort of thing. I think if you let it go and you get really, really depressed and you're now, also institutionalized, then you need medication to lift you out of that. You still need to, in my view, being of the psychological persuasion that you still need to have the talk therapies to really change the way you perceive the world, the way that you deal with problems that you encourage, that you encounter and the like. But in those cases, the medications need to lift you out of the depression sufficiently to be able to get the appropriate additional help. So depression is another thing that I think is probably overprescribed in terms of everybody thinking that they need to have these medications. And it's often the case too, when you go off of them, there's all kinds of problems that you experience when you come off of these medications. So I think in general, we're overly prescribed for many disorders, but having said all that, it's still the case that medications are really important in certain areas. And also when you realize how a lot of them have come about. A lot of people think that I worked with a physician, a world-renowned one, in looking at bipolar depression. And he always used to tell this story of like, well, what this does, he used lithium, and he said, what this lithium does is, you're missing this chemical in your brain, and we discovered that was what's missing, and that we need to now replace it. That wasn't at all the case. Maybe it was a good story to tell, but the way that a lot of these medications are actually discovered is they're intended for something totally different. And then they find this side effect of, but it also lifts somebody's mood, or it, solves erectile dysfunction is a perfect example as well. These medications were never intended and weren't created to address the central problem they were first focusing on. Turns out that they just discovered that they had these other effects as well. And so, but having said all that, there's still a value, and I wouldn't want to argue against, the importance of medications for certain types of illnesses.
Yeah. So, Prof, why do you think that there is public collapse in trust in the pharmaceuticals?
Well, I think partly because it's such an industry. I think that we're sitting here in Canada, and Canada has a public health care system. And when I first worked on AI, it was actually the first commercially available, large-scale, popular system called IBM Watson some 13 years ago. Yeah. We were working on the first problem that we were going to address was oncology, cancer. And, why not start with the hardest problem right now? In hindsight, it was kind of maybe not the greatest idea. But when we were working on that, I started with my designers and researchers here in Canada. We went to a cancer clinic, spent a week seeing how it all worked, what the doctors did, what the nurses did, what information they were collecting and the like, in a cancer clinic in Ottawa. So we had our notion of how medicine worked. And then after that, we started to work with cancer clinics in the US. And it was entirely different. There it was an industry. And now it was like, everything came down to the profit that was going to be made. And as a Canadian that sees healthcare as a human right, I found it offensive, quite frankly, that there was all this focus on, the profit motive with regard to all of this stuff. And so I think that that's the case in general with the pharmaceutical industry as well, that there's a huge focus on, what money can be made for it. I was even told at the time there were like cancer drugs coming out. There were all these research groups working on cancer cures, if you will, and they all go to a conference twice a year, and investors are sitting in the audience, and they're constantly, and I think that's just abhorrent. Whereas they also have Canadian representatives of the Canadian healthcare system, and they are also looking at, okay, what's really the cost benefit with regard to some of these. So rather than just going for the most expensive because it's the latest one or whatever, the Canadian leaders and healthcare choose what is reasonable for including in the drugs that are approved for use in Canada, sort of thing, right? So I think that that's what is at the heart of this, that there's a mistrust of institutions that are really clearly only looking at making a profit, and that they don't seem to care that much about the patients, especially when there's certain drugs that are necessary for keeping people alive, and yet they still are going for as much profit as they possibly can for it. There may be exceptions to these, companies, but I think when you asked about what's the, reason behind the mistrust of that whole industry, I think it's that. I think it's the notion that what's going to stand in front of me and my future life is, needing to pay a certain amount of money to a company for medications. I think that is what would really engender, some mistrust.
Mm. So, Prof, again, you made mention of the IBM Watson.
Mm-hmm.
It's a project I don't want to kind of rate its success,
Mm-hmm.
but I want you to viscerally or personally rate the the success of the IBM Watson.
Well, the first instance, and we were the first company that really came out with anything that was with artificial intelligence. It wasn't what is now known to be generative artificial intelligence. So you needed to do an awful lot of training. We had to suck in the entire medical literature, for example. We needed to train it. We needed to make sure that it was coming up with the right answers. And I think that the technology is now caught up, all of about a year ago, with OpenAI coming out with ChatGPT. We now have generative AI, which basically is something that you don't need to train. You can just simply take the entire internet that's sucked into it, and it's trained on huge data sets. And so I think that we are now at a point, and IBM still has a very good AI offering in IBM Watson X is called now. And so it's the generative AI version of it. And so they do things like, for example, guarantee that IBM's AI models don't include somebody else's intellectual property, as an example. You've heard Sam Altman say for OpenAI, there's no way in heck he could basically say that. And IBM is so confident that when you use their AI, that it won't include somebody else's work that somebody else owns, that they actually even indemnify. They'll actually sort of guarantee that will stand behind their statement that their AIs are appropriate for use in, for example, industry. So, you can't be using an AI, in an enterprise if it's going to, significantly hallucinate, number one, and also if it's going to be using stolen IP, basically. And so I think all of us can feel comfortable just using something like ChatGPT for our general use. But if you're really talking about, using it for, like right now, I'm writing my second book, and am I using AI for it? Yeah. But I also want to make absolutely certain that everything that's in it is not somehow, compromising somebody else's intellectual property, because then you'd be sued. And it's also just not the right thing to do. So I think that there's an important issue of making sure that the AI technology is not just so amazing that you're so impressed by it, but that it's also now, appropriately ethical, in not using, like I said, somebody else's legal work. Now there's work going on, and there's a bill or another executive order, I think, that just was written in the last week, talking about AI in the U.S. And the proposal there is that there will be no regulation whatsoever. So now everybody will be able to steal whatever information they want, which is, I think, the absolute opposite direction you need to go. I think we're at the precipice with regard to AI, and the power is just, increasing exponentially, but we don't see the concern and focus in terms of how to harness it and how to protect against it getting anywhere near the attention that the discussion of the race towards AGI is all about.
Wow, that's a great flow. So, Prof, do you think with the current government in North America, they have the proper structures and framework in place in regulating these AIs?
No, in a word, I think that I don't think the whole world doesn't have the sort of infrastructure or the guidance or the governance in place to deal with AI. The only hope that I would have would be for the EU, who tends to be more on top of this kind of thing. They've already got some laws related to this, but think about it for a minute. And Bill Gates came out with a thing in 2022, I think, where he talked about the robot tax. He said, all these companies are getting rid of employees and replacing them with AI. Those people that they're replacing used to pay taxes. So now when these AIs come in to replace those jobs, now all of a sudden, the person that was out of work, they need to be supported by the government, right? And they might need to be retrained, but they might need support because they're unemployed now. There's very little focus in that area. And when you think of the elections in North America and Canada and the US over the last year, I don't remember this topic coming up at all. But yet at the same time, everybody talks about that in the next 2 years, maybe 5 years, there's going to be huge portions of the population that are going to lose their jobs to AI, especially knowledge workers, right? So anybody that's doing work that AI is now somewhat capable of, in another year or two, it's going to be amazingly capable of doing those jobs. So what are we doing now to prepare for the situation where all of those people will be out of work?
So, Prof, with you, which professions, disciplines do you think are future-proof against AI?
I think there's a few. They're physical roles. So, your plumber, your barber, all of those roles where you're doing something physical, I think are safe. I think that everything that is like a knowledge worker type work, if you're you're working as a junior person in a law firm, that role is not going to exist anymore. A number of the design roles won't exist anymore, for example. My son is a designer, my eldest son, and he wrote an article about this and said that when he started off, he worked in Photoshop and Illustrator all the time, tweaking pixels, and he really had all the knowledge to be able to create sort of any design. And he then became a junior designer in a design firm. But now AI is doing a lot of that junior design work, right? And so then we get to, okay, what do designers that are going to remain, what do they need to know? And they need to know, and they need to think in much different ways. So it's no longer, you're not going to be pushing pixels, to use that line. You're now going to need to be focusing on kind of the craft, the overall strategy, the overall feel, things that AI isn't good at, right? And I think that this has a lot of implications for education. So a guy that I teach with, Michael Hartman, and I are talking about starting this initiative, looking at how do educators respond to where we're going. And a lot of the education, a lot of the undergraduate education that people are getting today is not going to be relevant anymore, because we'll be able to rely on AI for a lot of that. But we need to change the kinds of things that we're teaching people so that they can live in that, future world, as well. I think it's also the case that down the road, I did some foresighting. So I was sort of thinking about where could things really go, 5 or 10 years from now. And I wrote a blog post, you can get it at karelvredenburg.com, where I talked about AI as a brain prosthesis, where you think, okay, AI is going to be able to do a lot of things. We already use AI all the time off to the side, right? You can ask a question. You might ask it to further improve this sentence that you wrote that you're sort of struggling with, how you might reword it. You're going to use AI for that. You might use AI for analyzing some data and the like. But then think about in the future, what if you were to really enhance the interface that you have between you and the AI and actually even wire it directly into your brain? I know it's a crazy idea right now, but there's significant advances being made in that area as well. But I think my main point of this is not the wiring your brain, but more thinking about, okay, if the AI is going to do these certain things, think about what kinds of things you could do and further develop as a human that could make you really valuable to the companies that you're going to work for. And also just in dealing with this new world where we have sort of AI. One of the people that's doing a PhD in London that's on my team at Habits for a Better World mentioned, because she was running one of the AI teams. We have like 7 different AI teams. And she was saying with regard to this, Karel, I've got a section of my resume and portfolio that is labeled, this is what I can do that AI can't. So let's be explicit about, and then start to further hone and advance what you're doing there as well. Her project, just to cover that as well, she also talked about sort of this concept of digital dementia, which is an interesting concept that just like when you use GPS for driving, right? We all now, when we go to a strange city or whatever we use, or probably in our own cities, use the GPS to guide us to where we want to go. And I'm willing to bet that many people, that if you're going to go to a city that you've been to many times, but you've gone to with GPS, that you still wouldn't be able to find your way around if you didn't have GPS, right? And that's also what's happening now with AI, that people are relying so heavily on the AI that they're losing their own abilities to do some of this, right? In fact, there's a study that you're probably aware of, came out of MIT recently, that looked at brain imaging, looking at what parts of the brain are lighting up and working for a group that didn't use AI at all, a group that used a separate second group that was using AI, but as an augmentation. So they still did their own work, but they used AI, occasionally to help with their work. And the third group that used AI a lot. And just looking at parts of the brain that were lighting up, when you look at the brain imaging pictures, you see that the people that are using AI a lot are losing a lot of cognitive ability. So this whole notion of cognitive dementia is really, I think, that captures it well to say, you know what, we keep going down this path. AI is definitely going to replace us because it's doing mostly everything that we're doing now anyway, right? So I saw this morning that OpenAI just announced that they're putting in controls for people that are using like a long conversation with ChatGPT, that it'll pop up and say, hey, take a break, go outside for a while. I don't know what it's going to say, but I haven't seen it yet. But really getting to the point where you're not relying on it all the time. And the study that I was saying that this woman in England named Jay, her team came up with something that we're going to do as part of Habits for a Better World, sort of characterizing what happens if you rely too much on AI. That somehow, the story was that this two people, one guy was relying really heavily on AI, and his partner in his place of work was just using it as an augmentation, and that all of a sudden the AI isn't available on a particular day when his boss really wants him to do some really important piece of work, and there's a real deadline. He's pulling out his hair and he's saying, oh my God, I can't do this. And he's sweating. And I think that what we want to do is guide people away from that, because it's really a phenomenon that's happening right now. We talk a lot about an over-reliance on cell phones, right? That everybody's constantly looking at their phone. But AI is going to even be worse in the sense that it's going to actually even rob us of our own, cognitive faculties that we have now. So I think that this is the most important change that's happened in my lifetime. So when I think about the introduction of, personal computers, I witnessed that. The introduction of the internet, the introduction of cell phones and those were all really important changes. But the introduction of generative AI is absolutely bigger than all of them put together. And I think it's going to fundamentally and foundationally change the way that society works.
Oh. Prof, I was trying to put all these pieces together to get the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to ask, you had the experience of the internet boom. And right now, you are witnessing the AI in its infancy. People are trying to understand it. People have their own way of reading into it. People demonizing it. Some seeing it as a tool. Some seeing it as human. No, a whole lot. So, what are the distinct differences between the internet boom and AI in its infancy? And I would like you to kind of project into the future the kind of things that you foresee, happening with your insight and experience under your belt.
Yeah, I think there's really two sides of it. One is that it's amazing, when you think of AI and that particular era that we're in right now. It's going to solve problems that we haven't been able to solve for a long time, because it'll be able to take, the collective wisdom of every smart person on the planet that's written anything. We'll be able to make huge advances in a number of different areas. Personally, we'll be able to, so there's lots and lots of advantages to it. I think the part so I don't think I'm either a fanboy of it or a doomsayer with regard to it. It's more a matter of saying we need to have an appropriate set of controls on it. And when you think about OpenAI, which is the company behind ChatGPT, when it started, it was a nonprofit. It had a nonprofit board of directors. I teach board directors, by the way. And they wrote up a charter of what OpenAI needed to follow with regard to the safe invention and development of artificial intelligence, with a huge focus on watching and avoiding the negative directions. Many of the technologies that we've had in the past, something like social media, for example, something like Facebook, the notion was just allow people to share pictures of their family and connect people. And what could possibly be wrong with that? Well, you just have to start to think about what the unintended consequences might be of a direction that we're going. So social media, they didn't, but they could have done appropriate foresighting that would say, what would a bad actor do? What would somebody that's going to now use this for ill, use it for in a negative way? Heavily focus on that and then build the appropriate, guardrails to prevent that. And I think with AI, when OpenAI first started and they had that charter, that was looking good. But then they changed that, right? There was this big upheaval that happened in OpenAI. They wanted to get rid of their CEO, Sam Altman, because the nonprofit board felt that he wasn't behaving according to the charter that they had created, right? That he was leaning in way too heavy on the financial side of this thing and the profit side of it. And so, he left the company for a week and was hired by Microsoft for a week. And then he went back there again. And now, there's, a huge focus on just aiming toward AGI. I hope that they've got enough people working on this stuff, but I worry that they're not, and that original nonprofit charter is no longer guiding, what they're doing. And it's also the case that across the board, there are many companies now working on this stuff, and even the American government, like I said before, with this new AI sort of bill that they're or law they're bringing in, they're really saying, well, this is a big competition between the U.S. companies and China. And DeepSeek is a good example of wow, they could do a lot there, even with the constraints. But what's worrying about that is they're now saying there's this competition between the U.S. and China, or maybe the West and China, and that as a result, all controls, all guidelines need to be thrown out the window. Everything needs to now be to succeed in AI. I think that's incredibly dangerous. I think that we need to have appropriate focus on how do we control this stuff, and how do we avoid it doing any number of things that we're already seeing some instances of what it's doing. And that's, I think, as important as looking at what are we going to do with the sort of the mitigations as a result of job losses, for example, like we talked about in a minute ago, that we need to have a plan for what's going to happen to the people that are going to lose their jobs with regard to AI. But we also have to have some appropriate governance of the development of AI as well. Now, I should say something else just on the positive side. I think everybody should know what AI is. I come across some people that are saying, no, I think it's awful and it's going to destroy the world and I don't want to have anything to do with it. I think everybody needs to have a personal experience with what it's actually capable of, and also sort of how it's developing and the like, somewhat cautiously, like I said before, not over-relying on it. So we're at a tricky spot, and it's hard to be really confident of what the future will hold. I think that when you talked about, talking about what the future might look like with regard to AI, I can envision a future where, like I said, we're now solving all these major problems, the health issues that we've got right now that we haven't solved, and that the governance is somehow dealt with, and that we also are dealing with, the job losses, and that people are now appropriately using it as an augmentation most of the time, and that maybe some jobs are going to be taken over with it, but that there's a reasonable path forward. That's what I would hope would be the future. But I also see a future that could come about whereby there's no governance of it. All of it is just down to this, competition with China argument, and that we have a lot of the negative consequences that even the biggest doomsayers are talking about with regard to it as well. So I do think it's incredibly important to focus on this and sort of lean into, like, for example, this notion of changing universities so that we're educating people that are going to go into this new world that includes AI that is different from what we are doing today. We need to change the way that universities work so that we don't need to, spend the next 2 years with curriculum committees trying to change what they're teaching. We need to work at the speed of AI to be able to change things like institutions like universities. But we also then need to focus on individually providing guidance for people to choose the right disciplines, like you asked earlier, to get into. So I think, the trades are definitely safe, but I think there's also going to be new roles that are going to come out of this, and they may well be governance roles, I hope, in terms of AI as well. And then obviously AI security type roles as well. So there will be new roles. A lot of people will say, oh yeah, but AI will take some jobs away, but brand new jobs will appear, and like all the other times in history, we'll be fine. Well, I'm not so confident that it's going to be that smooth. I do think we need to be intentionally focusing on, creating new roles, but then also changing education and also providing guidance for how people deal with AI.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. And also, Prof, as one who is a global leader in your approach and very pragmatic, that you try to identify global problems or challenges and take them personal. Do you think that the global South is ready for this shift?
Great question. And that I worked on Don Norman, one of the design leaders, and I kicked off an initiative called the Future of Design Education, where we focused heavily on the global South and focused on, if we're going to design systems, we have to design it for the whole world. We need to worry about environmentalism and all that kind of stuff. Again, universities don't generally teach that either, right? I think that the global South, and also, quite frankly, any part of the world outside of the United States and China, because that's where all the action is in terms of AI companies and the decisions that are being made. I think we're all kind of just walking on the coattails of these large American companies, quite frankly. So I think that there are instances where I can see there being real positives for using this and AI in the global South, for example. I think it's also the case that I can see that even using it there, it's one of these cases where it's like when you look at cell phone use, right? Cell phones, when they, cell phones and computers. When you look at online banking in North America, where we already had, the infrastructure so you could do online banking on your computer and the like. When you look at the global South, the adoption of online banking and even micro lending and all the rest of it, that was all done on cell phones, because all of a sudden there was an opportunity to do it in a different way because we're doing it. And I think that there are going to be opportunities to do it differently in the global South. But I worry, like I say, that the decisions being made about the trajectory that AI is on, that the Global South, Europe, the rest of Asia, Canada, South America. Nobody is in the driver's seat on the direction that this is going, other than a few companies in the United States and a couple of companies in China right now. And I sound like I'm doomsayer here in terms of where things are going, but I think I'm also just trying to draw attention to that this is an important thing to deal with, and that when we are dealing with the politicians, wherever you are in the world, this needs to be an important issue that needs to get into elections, that needs to get into decisions that are being made. And right now it's sort of like everything else is being covered in elections, but this is one that is just creeping up that I think needs a lot more attention.
So, Prof, close to the conclusion, I know that we need to get you back again so that we do another episode. Trust me, because you are loaded with so much information and details that we and the people who listen to our show can benefit from. So, what are some of the initiatives, programs, projects that Habit for a Better World are trying to put in place to kind of put people in the position where they can upskill, reskill, have good habit for this digital evolution?
Yeah, a lot of the things that we've talked about can actually be addressed by kind of this ecosystem we're developing. And that is that rather than relying on companies or governments, we're trying to use the same technologies and methods that companies use to try to convince you to change your habits in a negative way, like buying a lot of sugary drinks, for example, and seeing advertising for that. We're trying to use the same techniques and technologies to try to inspire you to adopt positive behaviors. And we currently have a number of focus areas. For example, the number one thing that you can do to basically improve your health and also to improve or basically lessen your impact on the environment and reducing climate change is to adopt a plant-based diet, for example. It's astronomical when you look at the actual data, right? When you look at the scientific data for the number one way, for example, in health, there's a book by Michael Greger called How Not to Die. Sounds like a clickbait type title, but it's serious science. It's a little bit of a hard to read, but Dr. Greger only refers to research studies that are not paid for by the industry that is in that area. So he's got the truth, basically, right? And he looks at the top killers of Americans. I think it's like 7 to 9 or whatever. Cancer, heart disease, all of the major killers. Then he looks at all the studies that have looked at adopting a whole food plant-based diet and seeing how much you can improve your chances of not getting those illnesses, or even if you have those illnesses, to improve your outcomes from them. And the research evidence is staggering. And so what we're trying to do is not say, oh, you need to adopt a plant-based diet tomorrow, Eugene, and overnight you need to completely change your behavior. We're not taking that approach. That all or none approach doesn't typically work. Because if I got you to do that and you said, yep, I'm going to do that now, about 85% of people like you won't be doing that in a year from now. The way to change you to do this is to just inspire you to start doing it a bit more, right? So just adopt more plant-based recipes, for example, or components of your diet. And then over time, with support, and that's why we're providing the website and the AI bot and the community of other people that are going through a similar change, helping people to make that transition, right? And over time, if you have gotten to the point where you're now, let's say, fully plant-based, you don't have to go that direction, but I mean, if you did, then you get the huge benefits of all these health benefits as well. Things like living an extra 11 years.
Wow.
Not a bad thing, right?
I thought.
Increasing your speed and your strength,
Yeah.
right? If you look at the people that are winning the big marathons and any of the endurance sports, even the weightlifters and all that kind of stuff, they're all plant-based, right? And a lot of people just don't know that. And
This
why
is
do
my
they not
first
know
time
that?
even knowing.
Because there's no money in it. There's no money in encouraging you to eat more plants. There's no broccoli company that is going to make a killing from you eating more healthily. There is a lot of profit to be made for trying to get you to eat unhealthily, right?
Yeah.
Because they have products they can sell. And so if even that one behavior change, that plant-based diet, for example, will also be the number one thing you can do as an individual to mitigate climate change.
Whoa.
It's like, and you can go through all the details, and we will be sharing all the data and the statistics and all that kind of thing. But the bottom line is that there's some simple changes like that you can make to your life. Now, we're not only doing plant-based, we're also looking at ways to, reduce waste, food waste, for example. We're looking at reducing plastics. Microplastics is a major problem. We're also looking at AI. And so, right? So things like trying to encourage you to not be over-reliant, on AI, making sure to take breaks, that kind of thing. So I think there's a whole set of topics like this. I think the other thing that I want to say about this, though, is that what we've now developed is something that we can tackle any topic where we want to encourage people to make a change to their behavior, because we're going to speak directly to you, not through your doctor, not through some other experts or governments or companies. We're going to be going directly to you with regard to social media, as well as in-person activations as well. You can then decide to maybe start trying it, and then there'll be all kinds of support. Digital, AI, all the rest of it. Our AI, by the way, I should mention that. The fact that we're using AI. Our first focus on AI was reducing energy use, because that was the biggest problem. It was basically 7 teams that looked at how to do things like choose smaller language models to be able to use, ChatGPT 4o Mini, for example, which is, or DeepSeek for that matter, that is about 90 to 95% more efficient in terms of energy use. So we have some things like that, and that also led to our building our AI so that we're building it in the way that we think people should be building AI, so that it'll be, lower in energy use. It'll also have the best practices, like not always going to the model for something you asked it last week, Eugene, and you can't find it. You don't go ask it again. You've actually got it available for you directly, or that we can pull it directly, the answer that you got last time. Also minimizing the use of the LLM at all, that we're building a RAG model, which is basically a way of ensuring that we provide the data. We provide the trusted data sources, so that the answers will not be hallucinated or based on some nonsense that's on the internet. That we make sure that it's using heavily the data that we have ourselves, and some friends of yours are helping with doing that as well. So I think across the board, it's what we're trying to present, and that's what's going to come out with the documentary when we basically come out with that. That's documenting how we do all this. It'll both be showing and inspiring additional people to make changes based on the results that we're getting. But it'll also be, I think, instructive to anybody that wants to change the way that society is going in a more positive way using the ecosystem that we're creating here. That anybody else can replicate that basically, and also even add things to ours. So additional topics, like the way we're structuring ours is we're doing on a monthly basis, there's going to be a particular challenge. So the one we're doing internal to our own 300 people, we're doing a test, an internal test of food waste, for example. So that one is one that we made up just to practice it. But other ones will be the topics that I dealt with, that I covered earlier. But we can also just use the same system to say, okay, what's a topic that you think that we want to encourage people to, as an individual, change the way that they do what they do every day? And it might be kindness. I've got one team that is still, I've kicked off, but we haven't really progressed it much yet, of looking at kind of kindness in the workplace and trying to make a more humane workplace. Right now, there's a lot, especially in the technology companies, there's really, I think, a lot of attitude that, well, you know, I can get rid of employees as soon as AI can do their jobs. It is partly the thinking, but it's also the case that there's just a lot of layoffs, and even the way the layoffs are done. So I think that that's another topic that we can take through this ecosystem that we've created here as well, Carly Williams and me.
Thank you very much, Prof. Like I said, we're going to invite you again for 3 or 4 episodes so that we can elucidate on this topic, including AI and health, and how we can evolve during these times, because we want to get better humans on this planet. Thank you so much, Prof, for coming and gifting us with your presence.
Thank you so much. Great conversation.